Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thank you for all the people who've been contributing to my channel, commenting, liking my videos, and subscribing. I really appreciate that. If you're so inclined, I have a link up at the top where you can buy me a coffee or two. Um, that's nice, the people who've been doing that. I appreciate that. It's nice to make a little money finally. Today, I thought I'd do something that was kind of a fun project. In the past, I've made a few Ammonite necklaces or pins out of Ammonite shell fossils, and I've always been fascinated with fossils. I used to teach earth science sometimes, even though my primary subject was language arts. So I'm really into the fossil creatures and stuff, and they make really cool jewelry too. So today we're going to make an Ammonite fossil pendant and maybe a pin. I haven't decided which yet. So let's get started. If you don't know anything about ammonites, ammonites are fossil shells, and they come in some different shapes, but generally they're spiral like this, and they come from a species that was wiped out during the Cretaceous extinction event, which happened, I think, about 66 million years ago. It's what wiped out the dinosaurs. They're not, of course, 100% sure of what all caused that, but probably a comet strike. They first came into existence in the fossil record at about 410 to 415 million years ago, if I remember right, which I think was the Devonian period. It's been a while since I taught earth science, but they're kind of cool looking fossils. A lot of times they've been calcified like this. This is kind of a brownish tan calcite. On the back, it's still got some shell material, and sometimes you'll see a little opalescence in it. I can see some little light flashiness there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and recreate what the animal looked like a little bit. A little stylized probably, but it'll have tentacles and stuff like they originally did. They're related to octopuses. They're mollusks, and like what do you call them? Nautiluses. They're very similar to nautiluses. So for its eye, I'm going to use a little citrine that I found, a round citrine. Probably, I'm guessing, 3 or 4 millimeters, 3.5 at the max. I'm not good at judging the sizes of those things. So, as far as materials go, for this thing, it's going to have a bezel setting, but in order to make it work, we're going to have to use pretty deep bezel. And it's still going to have a little bit sticking out the back here, which is fine because it's going to be a pendant and resting like this. It won't hurt anything to have a little bit of that sticking out. But the challenging part is going to be that it's shallower over here than it is over here, so we're going to have to do some building up at the bezel. And I'll probably use 14 gauge square wire to build up parts of that to hold it flat. But this is 1/4 inch fine silver bezel strip. I believe this is a little bit thicker than the 28 that I used, maybe 26 gauge. For the head of the ammonite, I'll probably use some 18 gauge sterling sheet. The tentacles, I think this is 12 gauge half round, maybe, based on looking at it. And that'll make good tentacles for this size of a piece. So I kind of sketched out what I was going to do here. Just make sure you can see this here. I tried a couple of sketches. I didn't like what came out at first, but I think something like this. Ammonites actually had 10 tentacles, according to most sources that I see. And they have 4 of these smaller ones on either side, and 2 longer ones that have kind of sucker ends on them. I'm only going to portray 4 of the other arms there and the 2 long tentacles because it would get to be too cumbersome to do all 8 of them, and we're looking at it from one side, so we'll just imagine that the other ones exist. Okay? So, all right, so let's get started by making a bezel for this thing. And got kind of a weird shape when you got ammonites like this. We're going to have to do some creative bezeling. I've made a few of these in the past, I think maybe just two, but I was never super pleased with the final outcome. I'm going to try and make something that I really like this time. Hopefully. We'll see. Okay, so it's tempting to do the end of the bezel in a cranny like that, but that's a bad idea because you're going to get kind of a weird solder joint that's unmovable, and I'd like to have something that I can manipulate a little bit. So I'm going to make a sharp bend kind of over here about where it's going to hit. Kind of like that. And I can just see what I'm doing there. Put that in the crook there. I'm just kind of like wrapping it around like that. We don't want to have a lot of excess space on these ones because we're going to have to set it on a ledge on the bottom of the bezel here. You'll probably notice that I have the Ammonite on its face where it's flat, and that's so it's easier to get it tight around there. That looks pretty good. You can actually find some Ammonite fossils near where I live. There's an area in Fort Collins called Fossil Ridge, and there's Ammonite fossils along with some, what do they call those things? They're like clams, but the name escapes me. Bivalves, I think they're called. There's also something called baculites around here that are related to ammonites, but they have a straight shell. If you're a little new to silversmithing, this might be sort of an intermediate project. When I was teaching classes, I used to, when I first started teaching classes to people, I would make the mistake of letting them surge ahead and try to do something that's probably above their skill level. And I usually ended up having to go back and fix a lot of stuff for them. And I don't think they learned as much that way, so always give yourself time to learn the basics before you start charging into things, you know. You'll save yourself a little frustration, probably. So it's important, since you're doing something that's, I guess it doesn't. Well, it does matter when you go to put the, we're going to put some stuff around the inside edge to hold this up. Kind of create a little step bezel. And so you want to make sure you solder the stuff that's going to hold it up on the bottom on the correct side, because this is not reversible. The ammonite is only one half of the ammonite. So I will explain what I'm doing in just a second here. So I want to leave just a tiny bit of bezel sticking up there for me to work with. And so this is not very thick, but if I use that as like a little platform for the Ammonite to sit on, it's holding it up a little bit off of the, so there's a little gap around here, so that I'll have some to work with that'll fold over the top of that. But what I can do then is I can kind of make, hopefully if I can find my T-pin, usually keep a couple of those T-pins floating around here. So I can kind of see where this thing sits on the inside of the bezel. What I'm doing is I'm scratching a mark at the height where that where the bottom of that shell meets the bezel. So I should be able to tell then, I don't know if you can see this or not, but it gives me a rough idea where I need to create a platform for that to sit on. And so probably what I'll do is I think I can do a piece of 14 gauge wire all the way around, and then I'll boost certain areas with some more wire to make it so that the Ammonite sits in there a little differently. Maybe some 18 gauge on top of the 14 gauge so that we can build up that height in certain areas there wherever it needs to be. But to start with, let's take a piece of 14 gauge and try and shape it to fit in here. I want to make a sharp bend in wire, so you can file the corner your big bastard file. You can file kind of a 90-degree, well, 45 degrees if you're looking at it that way, and 45 degrees that way. But that'll create a spot where it's easier to bend it sharply then. Like that. I'm going to cut it off a little long so it's less unwieldy. That way I don't have to be flopping that wire around everywhere. It's all fun and games till someone loses it on. So you can see that's still a little bit too long, that right there, so I'm going to snip that a little shorter. I feel like that's pretty good. So let's try and solder that one in. I use quite a bit of solder on this because I want to get a seam all the way around there. Now you can see it's going to sit too low on this side now, so that's why I need to boost it up a little bit over here And I still got that scratched line in there, so I can see where the points are where it sits up, where it's not sitting high enough, I should say. So mostly it looks like over here I need to add a little platform. So let's see what I can do there. I'm going to try some 16 gauge. Not quite as big as what I was using, but not as small as 18. A little steeper of a curve. Use the curve of the ammonite kind of as a guide. So I make the marks so I can see better what I'm doing. It kind of rejoins the rest over there. Over there. So that's the low spot. So I should be able to just taper this a little bit on either end. There's likely enough solder for it to just solder to itself, but I'll have some handy in case I need to add. So it's almost there. Still dropping down a little bit on that side. So I also need, it's sitting up a little too high on this side, so I'll probably use a ball burr and Dremel some of that out of there, just to make it kind of a slope so it sits down a little bit on this side. So I'm going to do that, and then I may have to add a little lip up here to raise this side a little bit more. I feel a little more rested now, so we need to start moving on to our next step on the ammonite here. So we got to come up with a little part that's going to be his head, and so I think I'm going to use some 18 gauge sterling silver sheet, and I don't need a very big piece. So I think I'm going to start by cutting myself a little square. So we gotta probably get a kind of a square about like that, and then I'll attach the tentacles to that as well as make a bezel for that little citrine that's going to be the eye. Prior to that, I'll probably use the saw to cut out kind of a shape. I'm thinking that these two main tentacles with the little ends on them are going to come straight out of the edge of the sheet, and these other ones I'm going to solder to the top of the sheet and merge them into the top of the sheet so it looks like they're kind of just growing out of it. I think like that. See this or not? Then this little thing needs to be cut out of here too. So all right. See if I can follow my little scratches when I go saw. Okay, let's do a little saw. This is like the third or fourth project that I've sawed with this blade, and I haven't broken it yet. Knock on wood, right? Yep, there we go. See, I jinxed it. sort of the shape. I can probably just cut this off this way a little bit, and then I'll use the file to neaten it up, make it look more roundish. Okay. Okay, so we're way too big. Okay, I found a little smaller stone. It's not a citrine like the other one, but it's a little, just a clear cubic zirconia. That's all I could really find that was about the size range that I needed today, but that'll work pretty good for this one, I think. It'll give it some sparkle. Okay, so we've got to go even tinier on the bezel. Biggest problem when doing these little bezels for me is not knocking the stone onto the floor and losing it. They're so small. Let's see how this looks now. I think that's more manageable. I just needed a little bit of an edge to attach the tentacles up there. So I think maybe I'll solder this on first. I need to have a little space between this bezel and this bezel here so that I'm able to set the stone down there. It's going to be a little tricky anyway because of the close proximity to the other bezel. So I have to be creative. I think I'm going to drill a hole through there right now, but I'm not going to film that for time's sake, so I'll be right back. So you can see I drilled a hole through the center of the bezel there in the bottom. That way the stone will be able to get some light, and I can just park that center of the stone in that little notch. That'll allow me to get the bezel pretty short. Eventually solder it on here, but I think I'm gonna make some tentacles first. So looking at my drawing here, I need a couple of long ones with little tips that are different. So thinking about size-wise. I don't think I was in frame there, so I'm going to make these two first here. So I need some that are. This is that half round wire that's, I think it's 12 gauge probably. So the first thing I'm going to do is they need to kind of taper a little bit, so I'm going to file them to a taper. Sort of a taper going on there. Do the same thing to this one. Okay, we need kind of little leaf shapes. So, I think I'm going to use maybe 22 gauge. They don't need to be super big. Probably get them both off this end piece right here. think that's the right idea, but I think it maybe needs to be a little more rounded on the back side. I think I'll use this one to trace out a similar one on here. Probably the easiest way to get these on here is just sweat a little bit of solder onto the surface of each of these, and then just lay the tentacle on top of it, and then we should be able to just solder it right down. Don't probably need a huge amount of solder. Yeah, that kind of puddled out nice. I'll just flip this guy around. Most of the mass is in this piece of wire, so I'm going to focus a lot of the heat there. Okay, let's start thinking about how we're going to attach this onto the front of this. I think I'm going to angle this a little bit and attach it to the base of this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and file this down so it matches up. Okay, now we can play a little bit with the curves maybe. So to curve something against the way that it wants to go, sometimes I'll hold it flat against the table like that. And you can use your flat nose pliers to get a little curve to it. So now we need to add 4 more tentacles, these ones without the little end things on them, and make them curve the way I want, and then we'll solder them down right on the edge of that on top of the sheet. And we can use the Dremel to kind of smooth them in so they look like they're just emerging from the head. Need to cut some more of these guys. Where'd that go? Like I said earlier, normally these have 10 appendages, I think. 2 of those and then 4 on this side and 4 on the other side. But for the sake of simplicity and because I don't want to do 8 tentacles, I'm just going to do 4. Plus the 2 other ones, I should say. Same thing I did before, just file these to a point. I'm just not going to add the little sheet thing on the bottom. I don't want to get them too thin at the end, otherwise they'll be kind of pointy. Alright, so now comes the fun part, trying to bend these the way I want them to be. So I'm going to start with this top one here. I'm keeping the flat side flat on the table. It's going to try and twist on you because of the geometry of this sort of wire. So periodically, if you need to, stop, flatten it back out again. Once you get it started, you can also pick it up and do a little more manual kind of stuff. Let's do it there first, and then we'll see how it looks. I always cut off a little more. It's a little hard to add some back. I'm going to round these ends here. Okay. So this guy I'm going to kind of do like that, I think. Then I'll need one next to it that I have to move him up a little bit. And we'll do another one that curls around this way. I'm tapering the top down on these so that it looks like it kind of merges with the head there. And I may have to do some fine tuning. We'll go kind of there. Okay, I've got a bunch of tentacles. It's probably time to solder this onto here before I do these. And I think what I'll do is I'll pick a little solder there and I'll pick a little solder there and make sure we've got plenty. Now we can gradually add these things on. But I think probably if I sweat a little solder onto the back of each of these, that would be good. Now we just got to start placing these. I'm going to pick up a little extra solder in case anything doesn't solder the way that I want it to. Got a lot of individual components here. attaching it in places where the tentacles are overlapping each other or touching to reinforce it. Cool that off. Take a peek at it. See if I have any soldering touch-up to do. Not sure if I like him like that, or if I like him like that. Kind of like him like that, I think. Okay, I think those are soldered on, but let me, I'm going to let this pickle for a while, and then I'm going to take a little break, come back and put some findings on the back, and let it do a final pickle, and then I think we can set the stone and polish it. So, okay, so I went and asked my wife what she thought about the way it should hang, and she's inclined to think it should hang kind of like that, or this being the person's head like that. And I think that's probably a good call. So I think it'll hang nicely naturally that way because of the weight of the stone. We'll pull it that way. So we also talked about, because it kind of looks cool that way too, doing some additional hidden veils on this side too. Then you can have options, but I'm not sure if that might not clutter up the back a little too much. So I just wrapped it around with the rounded side on the inside, and I'm going to cut off segments of this. Not like that. I'm going to use the magnesia block so I can push this in so nothing falls off. Yeah, I think somewhere like there, and then right there on the back of that as well. So I can push this right into the pad like that. Okay, I'm gonna do a little experiment, I think, before I put this in for final pickling, for how it's gonna hang. Okay. Get this guy in the pickle and get him shined up a bit with the Dremel and stuff before we. And I think with I'll probably set the eye after I get it all pre-polished, but leave this out, and then I'll do a most of the way polish with the first wheel that I use, which is with white diamond, and then we'll set the stone. This is basically replaced with calcite, and that's pretty easy to scratch on the polishing wheel, and I'd hate to scratch that up because it's a pretty one. Okay, so I did a little bit of cleaning up with a rotary tool, and I filed this down to about the correct level on the little step bezel that I made. Oh, and I did put a little jump ring inside of there. I just, for the sake of the time that we have, I thought I would skip that step. This is an awkward position. I wouldn't normally do this kind of thing, but I'm going to gently try to pull these bezel sides closer together. Okay, so in little tight places like this, sometimes I use a knife blade to put a little pressure on it. You want to be careful not to cut yourself, of course. I have to use my loupe to look at it because I'm a little blind anymore. So I think in some areas here I can burnish it a little bit. I may need to use tips. That'll even get in there, I don't know. And give this a little push from the back and see how secure we are. Feels like it's staying in there. Nobody wants their eye to fall out. Especially extinct creatures. I think I'm going to go ahead and polish it for the most part. And then we'll come back and we'll put this guy in here. And then if I need to do any cleanup, I'll do a little bit of cleanup with the polishing wheel. So, all right, so I got it pretty much cleaned up and mostly polished. So I'm going to go ahead and set this stone. I just want to make sure I got enough of a little lip all the way around and pretty close to the same amount all the way around, preferably. I can push up or down a little bit on this because it's kind of slides in there nice. All right. The only one spot we might need to do anything with is the corner here. Tends to be corners tend to be kind of problematic, so usually I file the bezel a little bit thinner there, but during the polishing I think the bezel's thinned out enough, so I may not have an issue there. So we'll just go straight over to start with. I'm not happy with the top of this bezel here. It's a little bit rough, so I'm going to probably see if I can clean that up a little bit. I haven't figured out quite how, but I will do that, and then I'll take some nice pictures. All right, that was the Ammonite pendant. I hope you found it useful. If you did, make sure to hit the like button. I'd love to have you subscribe to my channel. There's lots of useful content here, many projects, some tips on doing things, and I continue to add to it on a weekly basis pretty frequently. We're doing 2 to 3 videos, big videos a week, usually a couple of projects and maybe a skills video. So feel free, if you want to, support my cause. Up top in the right hand corner of the YouTube page, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link. If you want, I'm going to be putting together a Patreon where I have a tiered membership system. So if you leave some comments regarding what you would find useful as far as perks for various levels of membership, that would help me out a great deal too. Because I want to provide information and resources that are useful for everybody, different levels, beginners, intermediate, and maybe a community where we can share ideas. That's kind of nice. I like to come up with new ideas and share them with other people. So thanks again for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.